Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm seeing people are still kind of like joining, so I'm going to give it a couple more seconds until we get to more people in our webinar. Thank you for being here. Hello. All right, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here at PACT's webinar that's titled Trafficking Prevention, Identifying Risk Factors and Improving Support Services. My name is Dr. Reynaldo De Leon Jr. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Deputy Director of Research and Community Engagement in the Educational Initiatives Department here at PACT. And I have my phenomenal colleague who's co-facilitating with me today. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Louis Guam, and I'm a social worker at PACT and also a senior education associate. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm part, as well like Dr. Ronaldo, of the Education Initiatives Department.
Thank you, Luis.
Mhm.
Okay, so some community and Zoom guidelines before we officially get started with the presentation, right? So based on the title of this webinar, just kind of like a trigger warning for all of you. We're going to talk about like sensitive topics, right? So we're going to touch on exploitation, abuse, violence, trafficking, and we want for all of you to be able to take care of yourselves. So we're big proponents of self-care. And so if it ever becomes too much for you, make sure that you are stepping away. If you need to mute us, we welcome that. Anything that you have under your belt in terms of just self-care approaches. We want you to be able to take care of yourself. Second, we want you to be open-minded, right? Because as individuals, our knowledge is very limited when it comes to a lot of things. But as a community, we know a lot. So that's what I mean when I say be open-minded. Also, this is a judgment-free zone. So if you have any questions, make sure that you put that in the question and answer box, chat box. We're going to get to that at the end of the presentation. Um, Also, Zoom guidelines, your cameras and mics are disabled. If you need closed captioning, that should be available on your end. So if you click at the bottom bar, there's like CC show captions on your screen. So if you click that, that's going to give you captions for our presentation. So we don't have control over that. You can do that in your own platform. This webinar is being recorded, so if you want to go back to it later on to review some of the concepts that we've discussed, that's open to you. You can visit our website later on and then access the recording in there. At the end, we have a post-survey reminder. If we have time, we might even just like do it as a group for like 3-5 minutes, and then we get to the Q&A. So I know some of the questions might be similar, so I'm going to look at certain like common themes, and then we answer the question in bulk. Hopefully we have time at the end. So we really plan for this webinar to kind of fit that section as well. All right, so program agenda for today, 5 sections. We're going to talk about human trafficking. That will consist of definitions, statistics, warning signs, and then risk factors. We're going to talk about at-risk settings, at-risk groups, specifically children and migrants. And then the third section is protective factors. There's like an overview about the 4 Ps to combat trafficking, different levels of prevention for, my public health folks in here, what I mean by that. We also have a measures of or measures to address risk factors. The fourth section will be mandated reporting. So again, heavy definitions in there, professional roles, some key messages, and then lastly, I would say kind of like a twin heart of the presentation is building rapport and improving services, where we talk about how we can empower clients, victims, community members, some of the best practices to foster a safe space, and understanding community fear. So ultimately, at the end of this webinar, we want you to be able to describe the warning signs of human trafficking, including child sex and labor trafficking, identify risk and protective factors of trafficking, particularly among children and in migrant communities, discuss the role of a mandated reporter and the importance of safe reporting, We want you to be able to identify practices to build rapport and trauma-informed relationships with clients or community members. And lastly, determine strategies to improve support services to help prevent trafficking among children and migrant communities. So a little bit about our organization. PACT stands for Protect All Children from Trafficking. We've been around since the early 90s. Our vision is to build a world in which no child is bought, sold, or used for sex. And to help achieve this vision, we focus on three main things, right? So education, this is what you're here for in terms of this webinar. Legislative advocacy, and also partnerships, right? So that the fifth section rather, in terms of building rapport and improving support services, a lot of the things that would fall under that section is really partnership. So we're going to hone in on that towards the end. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to transfer it over to Luis to talk about human trafficking and risk factors. Take it away, Luis.
Thank you. So I'm gonna touch bases on human trafficking. So it's gonna be more on definition, statistics, and the warning signs of human trafficking. But to start out, it's very important to understand what is human trafficking. The definition that you see on screen is a federal definition that we use in the US. Other countries we use definitions that are different, but in the US, human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. For the context of this presentation, force implies whether it's physical, verbal, or digital, where someone's being obligated to do something that they weren't consenting to. Fraud can be a stolen or imaginary identity of someone pretending to be an individual or an agency offering a false service to a victim or target. And coercion implies where someone was voluntarily seeking a specific service, but once they receive the service, they begin being exploited from the benefactor, the one providing the service. When it comes to labor trafficking, that is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services, again, utilizing force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, debt bondage, or slavery. In the US, whether it's a minor or adult, force, fraud, or coercion must be present in order for them to be identified as labor trafficking victims. Recruiting can be of victim or target recruiting more individuals. Harboring is keeping people enclosed in certain areas or hiding them in certain areas. Transportation provision or obtaining a person is either one is providing the vehicle or one is providing the service to transport individuals. Involuntary servitude refers to when the target is being targeted to work something that they weren't consenting to. It wasn't part of the job description. It wasn't what they made an agreement with in terms of what their work hours or working conditions would look like. Debt bondage can go in two different ways. The victim has a debt that they're paying back to their trafficker because they provided free clothing, food, housing, and they're paying back that debt through their labor, or the debt's imaginary and the trafficker makes the victim believe that they have a debt towards the trafficker and they're paying it back through their labor. And then slavery is to be forced to do something without your knowing and without your consent. When it comes to sex trafficking, there are two definitions utilized in the US. For an adult to be a victim of sex trafficking, force, fraud, or coercion must be present in the case. But for those who are 17 years or under, because they're identified as a minor, they automatically are victims. But what is sex trafficking? That is any sexual content, whether it's image or video that portrays sexual act, which is penetration orally, anally, or vaginally. Anything that portrays that sexual act in the photo or video automatically is content being used against a sex trafficking victim, especially if it's a minor, which we'll learn more in detail why minors specifically are automatically victims, regardless if force, fraud, or coercion is present or not. Now, what is the difference between human trafficking and human smuggling? Because there are some people who may confuse the two. Human smuggling is the business of transporting people illegally across international borders, which means it is not coercion. People are voluntarily seeking the service of migration because they want to leave or flee any violence or poverty they're experiencing in their own country, and they want to have a better future in a different country. But during the process of migration, or once they arrive to the country that they're migrating to, the human smuggling situation can convert itself into human exploitation, which can turn into human trafficking. But trafficking and smuggling aren't the same. Smuggling is the business of migration, and trafficking is exploiting an individual. Now, child sexual abuse material, which was previously known as child pornography, is now known as this new definition, which is abbreviation for CSAM. Why? Previously, the word pornography implies there's an element of consent that in most cases aren't present in terms of a child because minors aren't mindful or they aren't fully aware of what are they consenting to with creating one sexual content. Now, this can be any sexual behavior, any sexual manner. This can be any photo or video that shows nudity or behaving in a sexual way that doesn't portray sexual act. If there's sexual content of a minor being present that shows sexual act, then they're automatically trafficking victims. But if there's sexual content, which is photo, video of any other sexual behavior that doesn't depict sexual act, they automatically fall under this definition, which is child sexual abuse material. Now, it's also very important to understand that human trafficking victims can occur anywhere in the world, not just US, but in the US, human traffickers have exploited either domestic or foreign national victims in the US and abroad. Human trafficking cases have been reported in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and most US insular areas. Now, what are some statistics that we have as well? Well, in 2023, the National Human Trafficking Hotline has received over 30,000 signals or potential reports of human trafficking cases. And amongst those signals or reports, 7,380 of them came directly from either a human trafficking victim or survivor. Amongst those 30,000 signals, 9,619 were disclosed as actual human trafficking cases in 2023, which had a total of about 17,000 victims being involved within those cases. Now, within those cases, 5,572 of them were sex trafficking cases, 1,558 were labor trafficking cases, and 1,021 were sex and labor trafficking cases that occurred in 2023. Now, what are some myths and misconceptions people may have of how human trafficking victims looks like? One of them is all human trafficking involves sex. That is not true. As everyone has learned, there's also labor trafficking, and later you'll learn in detail that people can be victim of both labor and sex trafficking at the same time. It's not just sex, it's much more diverse and more in-depth than that. The second one is exposing people's sexting images would teach them a lesson. That doesn't teach anyone a lesson. On the contrary, you'll learn more in detail what happens when we're redistributing people's sexting images, but at the same time, we're humiliating or making the person become more vulnerable of the act that they created. Teaching someone isn't exposing their images. On the contrary, we teach them what is the long-term consequence. How do we resolve the situation? Teenagers that have been trafficked for sex are bad kids. Again, it's inaccurate. There's no such thing as a 100% good kid or bad kid. The same applies for adults. Human beings are very complex individuals, and on a daily basis, we're constantly learning new things on how to eliminate bad habits and develop good habits. So there's no such thing as, oh, only bad kids are victims of sex trafficking, or teenagers who are bad kids are victims of sex trafficking. Labor trafficking only happens in illegal industries. That is not accurate. Later in the presentation, you'll also learn the different settings, whether it's legal or illegal, but labor trafficking can occur in many legal industries as well. All victims of sex trafficking are girls. Again, that is not accurate. Boys can also be victims of sex trafficking, and there are statistics for that as well. There's also statistics for gender binary and also trans individuals who are also victims of sex or labor or human trafficking. It is not just girls. And lastly, people that have been trafficked can just leave their abusive situation. That is inaccurate. Later in the presentation, you'll also understand what makes it difficult for a victim of human trafficking to leave a situation of human trafficking. Now, aside from also debunking those stereotypes and misconceptions, it's very important to also understand what are the warning signs or indicators that detect if someone's a victim of human trafficking or not. The list that you see on the screen is very diverse and each one is different. But again, these are potential indicators. Just because someone portrays one of these indicators doesn't mean that they're actually victims of human trafficking. There is no universal checklist that defines if someone's a victim of human trafficking or another type of traumatic experience, which is why professionals look for a multitude of indicators. What is going on in the everyday life of the victim that the professional can assist with? But when it comes to sex trafficking and child sexual abuse material of a minor, some big red flags are: does the victim or youth have friends around their own age, and are those friends within their school or outside somewhere else? Are they constantly spending an increased amount of time online playing or communicating with an unidentified friend? What does that mean? That means that when a parent asks the child, who are you communicating with? The child just says, oh, it's a friend. But the parent doesn't put an extra effort to investigate who is that friend? What do they do? Where are they? What is their name? So that's an unidentified friend, where the child doesn't tell the parent or guardian in detail who they're communicating with or who they're playing the video game with. For the minors, though, they either travel unaccompanied on their own or with an adult that is unknown to the parents or guardians. Why is the minor walking outside by themselves or with an adult that the parent or guardian isn't mindful of who they are? Or for any of the examples that you see on the screen, they're always providing inconsistent explanations for all of them. When we ask them the same question every day, they're always answering in different ways because they're holding back something. And we want to better understand what are they holding back so the guardian or the parent can better serve the youth. Now, some indicators or warning signs that may portray someone being a victim of labor trafficking, again, it's very diverse. But the big red flags that professionals look for is: does the person have access to their earnings? Because everyone is entitled to have access to the money that we make through the work that we do. Is another individual speaking on behalf of the person whenever someone's addressing a question directly to them? For example, if I'm a victim of labor trafficking, this other individual always answers any question that was directed towards me. I no longer have the right or the autonomy to answer any questions that were directed toward me. It's the other person. Potentially, you're forced to work under certain conditions that you weren't agreeing in, or the working conditions isn't safe and healthy for the person. And does this other person have a possession of one's personal documents? Is it being held by somebody else? We're all responsible in having a hold of our original identification documents. No one else should have a hold of that. So again, those are indicators that something is going on, and it could be related to labor trafficking. Now, it's also very important to understand what are the risk factors, what are the at-risk settings that human trafficking cases can occur, and what are the two top at-risk groups for which we're going to touch heavily on, which are children and migrants. But again, what is a risk factor? Risk factors are characteristics that increase the likelihood of a person either becoming a perpetrator or a victim. And there are many different factors that may increase that likelihood or risk of being victims of trafficking. It could be economic hardships and poverty, abusive home environments, substance abuse and addiction. But again, like I mentioned before, it doesn't only occur, oh, people are victims of only sex trafficking or labor trafficking. There are cases, as you guys seen before with the data, that people can simultaneously be victims of both sex and labor trafficking at the same time. So it's very important to understand at least the three areas in terms of the settings that are high risk or at risk settings for these three different types of abuse or trafficking cases. When it comes to the first one, at-risk settings for sex trafficking can occur in hotels or motels, where they're always having an under-the-table business, where it's just a legal industry, the hotel motel itself, but under the table, individuals are being brought in exchange for some kind of sexual favor or sexual distribution of content. The work can also occur remotely, whether they're creating pornography or digitally they're communicating with other individuals. It can be truck or rest stops as well. For sex and labor trafficking settings, it can be nightclubs, strip clubs, any nighttime active clubs, commercial industries such as salons, spas, parlors, um, any legal industries that people typically provide some type of service, or residential private home areas as well. And when it comes to labor trafficking cases in the US, it can be the agricultural setting, construction setting, traveling sales or agency settings. But aside from learning the settings, it's also important to understand what are certain populations, certain groups, or certain identities that might be at risk or high risk of human trafficking. These populations, identities, they all experience different forms of discrimination, poverty, or violence, either from the community or from the trafficker. Abuse, neglect, social disconnection towards resources or family members, systemic inequities such as participating with government-run programs as additional assistance. A few just to list for examples of who are some of these at-risk groups or populations. It can be the LGBTQ plus folks or communities, people with disabilities, children, migrants, etc. These are individuals who are high risk due to the vulnerability that they're experiencing in their everyday lives. But to begin with, we're going to touch bases more on children. What makes children high risk or at risk group when it comes to human trafficking cases? And the big one is understanding what occurs online. How are kids easily falling for these tactics that traffickers utilize online to exploit children? And the three of them are catfishing, grooming, and sexting. So we'll learn a little bit more about the three in detail, what they are and how they look like. But catfishing typically occurs where the perpetrator, the predator, the trafficker creates this false imaginary of stolen identity with the objective of deceiving somebody or deceiving their target or victim, and typically do it to develop a relationship, oftentimes a romantic relationship that they have towards their target. Whether it's text message examples that you see on the screen that shows, oh, a normal conversation is communicated with this job opportunity, or they create a very attractive profile or the posts are very attractive. It has nice leisure lifestyle. There's money on it. People traveling in planes. It shows something more attractive to demonstrate that, oh yeah, the person you're communicating with online is a real person. It's a trustworthy person. So their objective is deceiving their target and making them believe that whoever they're communicating with is a real trustworthy person. Which is why we must always take precautions with who we communicate with. What are we sharing with them? Because again, in the digital world, anyone can be anyone can fake being anyone they want. We can fake being a different gender identity, age, religious background, educational background, and there's no official way of verifying 100% if they're a legitimate or not person. So again, it's very important to understand how can we recognize these catfishes? How can we detect that we're talking with someone that's real and safe to talk with, or are we talking with someone that probably we shouldn't be disclosing too much personal information of oneself? So again, these catfishers typically have something of value that they want to offer to their target, whether it's a financial opportunity, a job opportunity. They're always offering something, opportunity to fame, build wealth, to model, travel, something that potentially their targets are seeking for in life that they can't easily get a grasp of, but the trafficker has, so they can easily provide it. Or maybe they make you portray the idea that they can provide it. They begin by asking you personal information. Their profile is very attractive. Their first text message to you is very normal. So they want to get to know their target better so they can better understand how can they exploit the target. So again, they might ask your family members, how big of it is it? Where do you guys live? What are your personal interests? What do you want to become in life? But let's say one is pretty cautious of that and we wouldn't want to share too much information. They dive into one's profiles, whether it's social media or video game platforms, regardless if it's public or private. There's still a lot of valuable information, no matter how minimal it may be, that people don't always realize that, oh no, so and so can really understand who I am, what my interests are, where I live, what my contact information is, without having to send that first message to the victim or to their target. So it's very important to also understand the pros and cons of a public and private profile. And again, when you look at the catfisher's profile image, their account, typically their posts aren't consistent and it always lacks a picture of themselves or they always avoid trying to have video chat with you. Because again, they don't want to scare away their target. They want their target to believe that whoever they're communicating with is a safe, trustworthy person. Then comes the second tactic. In the first one, the victim already falls for the trick and believes that they're talking to someone that's real and safe. Then begins the second tactic, which is grooming or sexual preparation, where the predator or trafficker begins that process of wanting to gain the trust of their victim, and typically the objective is either manipulate them, abuse, control, or sometimes sexually exploit them. They have their own objective, what the trafficking predator wants to do, but their main focus is gaining the trust of the victim, so the victim becomes dependent of the trafficker. And in most cases, or some cases, not only do they gain the trust of the victim, but they also gain the trust of family members and friends close to the victims. That way, their family and friends don't suspect nothing is wrong with the trafficker because the trafficker looks like a trustworthy, caring individual. So again, we must take precaution. Who do we communicate with, and how much of our personal life are we opening up or disclosing or venting out to other individuals? Because one misconception people may have is they think, oh, these abusers, these traffickers, these predators are in another country. It doesn't occur in my community. It's not going to occur in my household. That is not accurate. There are also cases of where family members, close friends, or people in one's community can also be the abuser, the predator, or the trafficker. Again, this is a community issue. This is not just an other person's issue, another family issue, or another country's issue. Human trafficking can occur worldwide. So it's very important to understand. We must always take precaution with what we do in the digital world because we all behave in different ways when we're out in the streets, when we're at home, and when we're on social media. So always take precautions on how people are using the information of oneself because every intimate or minimal information of oneself is an advantage for the trafficker to easily exploit a child. So be very mindful of that. The third one is sexting. This is now where transmission of sexual content is being distributed in the digital world. And sexting can occur between a child and anyone of any age, whether it's younger, the same age, or older than them. Whether it's a minor or another adult, it's very important to understand that there are very serious legal consequences when the youth is being involved in the communication or the content, whether it's photo or video, depicts of a minor in a sexual way. In the US, it is illegal to either create, look at, distribute, or participate in the creation of child sexual abuse material. Again, this only defines photo and videos that depict sexual act or sexual behavior. It does not imply, for example, sexting sexual messages or sending sexual audios. It has to demonstrate any photo or videos of the sexual content of a minor who is 17 years and under in the US. But why? Why is it very serious? Why is there a legal consequence towards it? The reason why there are very serious legal consequences is regardless of what the content is, once something is posted online, it is almost impossible to completely delete it. Why? The victim can delete the history of where they distributed all of the content that they created or shared with others. But if the abuser has a hold of that content and redistributes on their end to other individuals, that part, sadly, the victim won't be able to delete because that is now out of the control. In most cases, youth aren't very mindful that what are they consenting to in terms of legal consequence and long-term consequence by just creating one sexual content. Even if it's of themselves, it is still illegal in this country. Which is why it's very important to understand what are those consequences of sexting, because they have very serious mental health impact on either the youth or the adults who sext. The first one is sexual extortion, which is occurred through grooming, and it's a form of online blackmail or threats to distribute more sexual content towards the trafficker because the trafficker or predator demands more of it. And they demand more of it in exchange for money, more sexual content, or other personalized requests that the trafficker may have that they want to use as leverage because they already have a copy of that one sexual content that the victim shared. The other one is image-based sexual abuse, which was previously known as revenge porn. That is when someone wants to publicly share sexual content that was only intended for them to the public. They want to punish or humiliate the victim because, for example, maybe they separate, the relationship didn't work out, the agreement isn't being fulfilled, and they want to have vengeance or have revenge towards the victim. Somewhere from they want to have revenge towards the person who was in confidence sharing them the sexual content, and they're threatening to post online the sexual content they shared. And in certain cases, they even go to that extreme level, which is why it's very important to understand that the US government and everyone does take a role in helping protect whether it's youth or adults in situations like this. For example, The Take It Down Act is a U.S. federal law that was signed into effect in May 2025 that aims to combat this type of non-consensual sharing of intimate visual depictions, the sexual content of oneself being distributed in many different ways. It criminalizes the online publication of any image and requires online platforms to remove them within 48 hours of a victim's notifications. So it's very important to understand that there are also other legal policies helping individuals in situations such as these. Now, what are some aftermaths in terms of impacts that this type of abuse has on children specifically? The first one is emotional. There's this level of distress or alienation where they now have difficulty in emotionally connecting or empathizing with other individuals. They're always confused with their daily activities, and they always feel a sense of guilt for the act that they've just fulfilled or escaped from. Some psychological aftermaths can be struggling and regulating their own emotions, impulses of emotions, very short attention span, disassociation with the communities, with the world. They may even develop anxiety disorders, depression, post-traumatic stress disorders, and substance abuse as well. Some physical stuff that they may have is basically they have to recover from the injuries, sexual transmitted infections, and unwanted pregnancies and etc. that they've gone through. Basically, their body has to recuperate itself as well. And educationally, they can't go back to school and think that, oh, I'm going to have a normal lifestyle. That interpretation of what normal was is now redefined in a whole different way. So at certain times, they may experience school absences or disruptions. They may fall behind from their peers. They may repeat certain grades or even experience isolation. Which is why, whether it's a parent, an adult, or a professional who works with kids, it's very important to understand how can we protect ourselves when we're in the online world? Because there are many different pros and cons of whether or not we want to have a private or public social media account. And all is based on the objective of our account. For example, if I'm going to personally have a personal account, it's probably best to keep it private versus having a professional account, which I can potentially keep it in public mode because there's different pros and cons for it. So always be very mindful of that and being mindful of how much private information am I posting online. We should never be posting our phone numbers, our last name, where we live, all the individual identifying information of oneself on who we are, what we do, or where we're roaming around. Because that's valuable information for a trafficker. That's valuable information for the public eye. Because now the public eye knows who we are, where we're moving, what our interests are, our size, the size of our family, and who our family members are. So being very mindful that these minimal stuff may not feel as much, but in reality, it's valuable information for a trafficker to exploit either a child or another individual. Always be careful of any friend requests or messages that are from strangers that you don't want to receive. Avoid accepting the first opportunity you see because sometimes many people fall for the first opportunity they see or they see, oh, certain law has changed and they believe it instantly, but they don't put an effort to verify, is this real or not? Always dedicate an extra minute or two to verify what I'm seeing right now online. Is this real or not? Find a professional, find an agency that can help you verify that information is legitimate or not. Always also avoid opening the first suspicious link ad that may appear because again, it may be prone to having viruses in it, and we don't want to have that virus in our device. Before posting something, it's very important to ask for consent from people. People always want to post pictures from their family vacations, dinners, parties, but we don't always realize that people in that photo or video don't always want to be posted, or oneself may be the one who doesn't want to be posted. So it's very important to ask consent for the respect of the individual that doesn't want to be posted. And if they don't want to be posted, we can always negotiate as well. If I put a filter on, will you feel comfortable? If they say no, I gotta respect that request. So be very mindful of the importance of consent. Same thing with the content that we're going to post. Always be mindful. Do I feel comfortable in posting this content on my profile, even though I know that my profile's focus is professional usage? So if I don't feel comfortable in posting this in my professional account, it's best that I don't post it because someone else is going to see it and who knows how they're going to use it against me. So if you don't feel comfortable in posting something in your profile, it's best not to post it. That way you can avoid a grave issue in the future. And it's also important to take action, not only blocking and reporting any suspicious or unwanted behavior and profile within the app, but it's also important to understand in my community who can I collaborate with, what professionals are there out there, and we'll learn more in detail. How can we find these professionals as well and collaborate with them? And take your device to a professional if you also suspect it may have developed a virus as well. That way, it's better protected as well. Other settings that people should be provoking conversation is the gaming platforms as well. It's very important when communicating with a child the different safety factors or risk factors that gaming settings or gaming platforms may have. So, to initiate conversation, we can always ask, would you show me how some of your favorite games are played and can we play together? That way, you as the parent or adult or professional have a better feel. Okay, what is being shown? What type of language is being used? What images is? What is the objective of the game? How do you respond if someone bothers you while you are playing? That way, you get a better sense of how is the child's ability to resolve issues that may arise or express their discomfort or find a resolution for a problem that's occurring in the gaming platform. And how much do you let people know about you while playing? Because again, kids are very trustworthy with the first person that appears to be someone trustworthy, but they don't always put an additional effort to really detect, can I trust this person? And what should I be sharing and should I not be sharing? So on the parent or adult's point of view, it's very important to understand the thought process of the youth when playing these games, of how much personal information of themselves are they sharing with the person that they're playing in the video game. Other tips for parents, professionals are understand the settings and capabilities of the gaming systems. That way you get a better feel of what are the settings in the games. Keep gaming consoles in an easy to supervise location. That way you can hear the language and tone that the youth is utilizing when playing the game and the participants in the game as well. What language and tone are they utilizing as well? Tell the child to never give out personal information while gaming, exact like where do you live, where your family is from, what are you dedicated and working with. Too much personal information are things that people don't need to know. Set rules and boundaries about how much time are you going to be playing, what type of game are you going to be playing, and what type of participants are you going to be playing with. And check to see if the games have reporting features or moderators. It's very important to also understand what settings are there present in the video game platform that I, as the adult, the parent, can filter out harmful content or make a report. Now, the second group that I'm going to touch bases on is the migrant community as well. To define a migrant community, that is, a group of people who have moved to a new country either within or across international borders for a variety of reasons. But why are migrants at a higher risk of human trafficking cases? It can be due to unemployment or lack of proper work authorization, and they're willing to accept the first job opportunity that comes along their way. But they don't always verify, is this legal or not? And what are my worker rights in the US, in New York State, or New York City? Because we are located in New York City. Family separation or unaccompanied minors who don't have a parent or guardian with them, lack of awareness, skills, or vocational trainings in being able to do a certain task, whether it's a soft or hard skill. Now, to understand a little bit more in terms of data as well, how much migrants do we have in the US? How many of it? How much do they accumulate in terms of the nation's population? From 2018 to 2022, we have over 45.3 million migrants in the US living at that time, which makes up 13.7% of the US population. And a majority of them live in the southern borders, along the US and Mexico border, or in western or eastern states. The top four states in the US that have the most migrants residing in them is California, number one, New Jersey at number two, New York at number three, and Florida at number four. And certain settings that typically happen for human trafficking cases of migrants is typically in labor trafficking, more specifically in the agricultural setting, because there's a 70% likelihood that most of the victims who are victims of labor trafficking in agricultural setting are typically migrants. But it's also important to understand what are some trauma that they're going through as well. What are the impacts that they're going to have because they're experiencing these potential cases. Number one is the isolation due to anti-immigration sentiments. The second is they are less likely to seek help for fear of deportation or arrest, avoidance of law enforcement due to, again, fear of unintended consequences such as deportation, or social services and mental health services due to a lack of cultural competency and fear of being other because the professional within that space doesn't know how to communicate or how to work with these different type of migrant communities. Now, what makes it difficult for a victim of human trafficking to leave the exploitative situation? Remember, a victim of human trafficking can't easily leave the exploitative situation for these reasons. Again, these are just examples. Not all 10 of them actually imply that these are what every victim goes through, but these are typically what the majority of them go through. But I'll touch bases on the most important ones, which the first one is they feel bonded to their abuser. They feel guilty for leaving because during that grooming process, they became reliant and dependent on the trafficker to supply everything, all of the financial, economic, and physical support that they were getting from the trafficker. The second one is they may not even have any other option or person to be in contact with. They're disconnected from their friends, they have no social resource or a way to contact their loved ones. They may feel resignated and think that no one else will accept or love them after they went through the experience that they just went through. And there can also be cultural beliefs that prevent them from seeking help or speaking out against their situation. What's an example of that? Many people may compare another person's traumatic experience. Oh, so and so passed something through worse than you, so don't worry about it. That comparing of traumatic experience is never a valid reason to not speak up or seek for help because we all go through different type of experiences that's valid for us. So we are entitled to speak up and seek for help. And sometimes cultural beliefs may put a barrier in that in speaking up or seeking help. On the service provider's ends, there are also barriers that prevent identification of whether or not this person is a victim of human trafficking or another type of abuse. And the main one is lacking knowledge or training on what human trafficking prevention looks like. Presentations such as these overcome that barrier. The professional may have preconceived notions of how an individual who has experienced trafficking will behave or what they look like. For example, maybe the implicit biases or what makes them think, oh, all human trafficking victims look like this because I saw it in this area, I saw it in this movie or in this news outlet. It's not always accurate. Other issues tied to language and communication barriers. There can be systemic and structural factors from the agency, intersectional awareness or lack of intersectional awareness, or the form that the professional agency documents and reports human trafficking cases as well. That is pretty much everything from my end. The remaining of the presentation, I will pass it on to Dr. De Leon, who will continue on with protective factors and so on. The space is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Louise. And I'm looking at the time. I'm going to try to match your promptness because we're halfway through the presentation. Thank you. So now we're going to move on into talking about protective factors, specifically the 4Ps to combat trafficking, the different levels of prevention, and measures to address risk factors. And so Louise talked about risk factors earlier, so it's important to kind of discuss the counterpart of that, counterpart of risk factors, right? So we have protective factors, and these are characteristics that decrease the likelihood of a person becoming a perpetrator or victim because they provide a buffer against the risk. So as we work to address trafficking in our communities, we have to also consider the following protective factors that prevent trafficking, right? So this is not, I know you see a lot of bullets in here, but this is not an exhaustive list. We've bolded a couple of things that we think stand out, and so we're going to go through that. The first one, important protective factor, education. So the increased awareness about the risks of trafficking and exploitation, that's why we're all in this space. Also, I would argue one of the most important protective factor would be positive role models, coaches, parents, and mentors. So research has consistently shown that a healthy, supportive, and trusted relationship is a key protective factor to prevent the onset of exploitation, and in some cases, even assist the individual in exiting the cycle of exploitation or trafficking. So it's really important that individuals, especially children, have positive role models in their lives. And then this is, I feel like, one of the most obvious ones, right? So we have to make sure that individuals have access to basic needs, stable housing and stable family income, and treatment for substance use and abuse. All right, so just going through quickly of the 4Ps. of to combat trafficking. We have prevention. So that's when we reduce the threat by providing information and resources. We have protection. That's when we disrupt the illegal activity by identifying and helping victims. Prosecution, investigate and refer cases for prosecution, and then partnership. This is when we partner with law enforcement agencies, and I would argue even like community-based organizations, so that we make sure that individuals are getting the necessary services that they would need. So jumping into levels of prevention, it's important to recognize that we need a multi-sector and interdisciplinary collaboration amongst organizations and institutions to ensure that we are covering all the gaps when it comes to service provision, right? So we have primary approaches. So this is on the prevention side, what you do before something occurs, the violence, the exploitation, the trafficking. So this is where education would come in. This is peer outreach and support, economic opportunities, access to substance use, treatment, and mental health services. Secondary approaches, these are all kind of like the steps that we take once the exploitation is happening. So this is the immediate response. What do we do? Again, provision of basic services. We also need emergency medical care that address short-term consequences. And again, for those already experienced in trafficking, the implementation of the safety planning, right? So the assumption is that this has already been done on the primary approach stage so that we implement it once something terrible is happening to the individual. So that would also include the emergency shelter and legal assistance as well. And then once that individual is out of that cycle, tertiary approaches would come in. So these are the long-term responses that are needed to be in place to ensure that we prevent exploitation and trafficking and abuse and violence from happening again. So that would include rehabilitative services such as stable housing, job training and counseling, and other support services that aim to prevent re-victimization. And in thinking of tertiary approaches, counseling or mental health services, right, would also fit in this category. So this is to address long-term impacts of the trauma of experiencing exploitation and trafficking. It's also important that we think about some of the preventive measures to address risk factors. So as many of you probably already know, I think I've mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, that human trafficking is not an isolated incident, right? So that's why I said something along the lines of the importance of multi-sector and interdisciplinary collaboration, because there's really not one organization that can solve human trafficking, right? So as risk factors, so we talked about this earlier, as risk factors kind of layer, the vulnerability for trafficking also increases. But to keep in mind, we also have an opportunity to intervene in each of these stages, right? And so focusing on preventive measures and addressing risk factors can help reduce trafficking and the long-term effects of trauma based on that experience. So these are just some of the tips for service delivery approach. It's imperative that institutions partner with organizations that specialize in serving at-risk populations, right? So Luis talked about children and migrants. So maybe partnering with a youth-serving organization or migrant-serving organization might be beneficial. And if you feel that your organization is at capacity or lacking training when it comes to trafficking prevention, that's when you reach out to other organizations. So PACT really specializes in preventive education when it comes to trafficking, so that organizations such as like our organization are able to train their staff on risk factors and red flags and what you need to do. It's also important to ensure services that are culturally and linguistically appropriate and reflect the unique needs of at-risk populations, and develop an outreach plan that includes strategic messaging for at-risk populations. And that last bullet in there, right? So when you're developing kind of like an outreach plan, this is where the community needs assessment would come in. So this is when you gather information from various sources to identify the needs of trafficking victims and the resources available to help them. So some of the things to consider when working with human trafficking victims or at-risk populations, or even if you're thinking about like piloting an education program in your community, these are just some of the things that you might want to think about, right? So it's your safety first. I feel like this is what we said in the beginning of the presentation. You're prioritizing the safety of individuals that are going to be involved in that programming. Also, complexity, recognizing that trafficking victims may have more complex needs than others. So there's not really a one-size-fits-all when it comes to responding to the needs of those who have been victims of trafficking. Meeting basic needs, so that means identifying the victim's basic needs and services. And then the last three bullets in here are kind of connected, right? So collaboration, meaning you're working with multiple professionals while appropriately maintaining confidentiality. And if your organization is not equipped to provide certain services, that's when you refer victims to case managers or other organizations to assist with barriers to services. And then lastly, outreach. So that means engaging communities and organizations to help them learn about available services and resources. So as I mentioned, when it comes to the work that we're doing at PACT, specifically when it comes to education, we refer individuals to other organizations when there's a need for mental health services or any other services that we're not able to provide. And again, going back to that interdisciplinary collaboration, that really proves really helpful. So that's something that has to be kept in mind. And it's not, when we're thinking about like needs assessment, it's not also a linear process, right? It's not a static step. Rather, it's an ongoing process when it comes to engaging community members. And kind of like tied into that, when we're building a trauma and conscious and person-centered relationship with clients, community members, it's important that the approach is empowerment-based, it's culturally relevant, and then trauma responsive. Okay, so when we say empowerment-based, that means we're focusing on the strengths and resiliency of the individuals without, of course, undermining their experiences, because whatever it is that they went through, those are all valid experiences, but it's also important to highlight the source of survive being a survivor, right? So that's something that we want to highlight as well. Skill development, we're supporting skill development, so that's where education would come in, and then again, provision of basic services, and also solutions focused, that means finding solutions before problems arise, thinking of that primary approach to that level of prevention. We have to be proactive when it comes to issues such as exploitation and trafficking. So having systems in place before those experiences even occur. Another important concept to keep in mind, making sure that the approach is culturally relevant, including communities in all decisions. So think back on the previous slide about community needs assessment. Oftentimes, clients, victims, community members, they would know what worked best for them. So it's important to ask for their feedback about, how do you want to move forward with the steps that you want to take in terms of continuously living your life. Making sure that the approach is also inclusive, ensuring diverse representation, honoring the uniqueness and experiences of the individual, and of course, going back to language, using empowering and culturally representative communication. And then lastly, on this side, on the right-hand side, we have trauma responsive, so making sure that we understand that each person experiences trauma differently, and then we are understanding how trauma impacts the brain and the diverse responses to trauma. So really, it's not so much about what you do when it comes to these concepts, but having the awareness of these different approaches, because they would prove helpful in certain situations when you are trying to provide services for a client or a community member. Okay, so that's a quick kind of like protective factors section, and mandated reporting is also going to be quick. There's a couple of slides in here, and I'm going to read off of them because they're really just based on definitions, right? So in federal legislation, a minor is defined as anyone under the age of 18. The federal government defines child abuse and neglect as, any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker, which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act or failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm. And then on the state level, civil statutes provide definitions of child maltreatment to guide individuals who are mandated to identify and report suspected child abuse and determine the grounds for intervention by state child protection agencies and civil courts. So criminal statutes define those forms of child maltreatment that can subject an offender to arrest and prosecution in criminal courts. As Louise mentioned earlier in the beginning of this webinar, child sexual abuse material is a crime in all 50 US states. So if there's anything that all the states agree on, it's this last statement in here. And I'm giving you all of these definitions because as a mandated reporter, it's important to know certain policies that exist in your certain like jurisdiction, right? So mandated reporters are certain professionals mandated by each state to report suspected child abuse and neglect to the state. They have frequent contact with children and have an early opportunity to help them get the intervention, support, and services they need to stay safe and well. So that's why we've kind of went through the definitions earlier. The role of a mandated reporter is that they must immediately make a report or cause a report to be made, ensuring that a supervisor makes a report when presented with reasonable cause to suspected abuse or neglect. So what do we mean by reasonable cause? So that means based on your observations of the evidence of what's in front of you, and or your professional training and or your experiences, you believe that the parent or legal guardian has harmed or placed a child in danger of being harmed, right? So that's what we mean when we say reasonable cause. And I've gotten a couple of questions from participants before about, oh, what if it's like a previous instance of like abuse or neglect? Do I still report that? And the answer is yes. Because we want to help law enforcement to collect as much data as they could to keep record of cases to better improve their abilities to detect future cases of child abuse and neglect. Again, more information, more data, just better response in the future. Another question that I've gotten from individuals is that I'm scared of like making a report because I don't want my name to be out there. So in certain cases, you are required to provide your name in reporting, but you can request for anonymity, right? And oftentimes a lot of individuals are hesitant to make a report because they're not sure. But the caveat is it's important that you still act in good faith because you're protected by law, right? You're immune from civil or criminal liability. But on the other kind of like side of that argument, if you fail to report a suspected abuse or neglect, that can result in criminal prosecution. So I say to individuals, if they think based again on their observation, their professional training, their experiences that there's suspected abuse or neglect, to just go ahead and make that report. Or if there's like certain policies that exist in your organization, making sure that you follow the necessary protocol. These are just a list of mandated reporter professions in the United States. These are the most common ones, right? So in the healthcare setting, we have nurses, doctors, or employees of a clinic or healthcare facility. In the education system, we have teachers, school employees, or child care center employees. And then for law enforcement, we have juvenile probation, detention, or correctional officers, and of course, police officers. And so to look up your state's mandated reporters, again, they're not the same in all of the 50 states. We encourage you to visit the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network or RAIN website. And if you do a quick Google search of the mandatory reporting requirements children, there's going to be a whole PDF list of lists of mandated reporters in each of the states, so you know if you are a mandated reporter or not. Okay, so that's mandated reporting. Key messages of that section is that you have to be vigilant and attentive to the warning signs of child abuse, that you make immediate reports or cause a report to be made, that you check your state or country laws and definitions to ensure compliance, and again, complying with your institution's protocol if there's already one that's existing. So there could be a point person in your organization that will be making the official report. It's just making sure that you are aware of that existing protocol. Again, mandated reporters who fail to report suspected abuse or neglect can be charged with a crime. And individuals who are hesitant to kind of like making a report, I want to reassure you that based on the Child Protective Service Act, that you are going to be protected by that law because you're acting in good faith and you have immunity in terms of like certain charges against you. Okay, so that's mandated reporting. Now, jumping into the last section, which is building rapport and improving support services. So we're going to talk about how we empower clients and victims, some of the best practices to foster a safe space, and also understanding community fear. All right, so part of relationship building when it comes to service provision with clients and community members is that we employ a trauma-conscious and person-centered engagement. So the way we build approach, or rather, the way we approach building a rapport and interacting with the individuals we serve, right? And it's not, again, a one-off kind of situation. Although it happens the first moment you come in contact with an individual. This is a continuous process, though. So this will continue through the time that we spend working with clients, community members when it comes to direct service provision. Uh, Individuals who have like experience when it comes to like complex trauma are able to heal and feel safe in engagement through holistic trauma conscious services that provide a safe space to kind of like build meaningful relationships. So it's really important that the approach is trauma conscious and person centered, because if it's not, then we are going to lose that opportunity to um, build a healthy and good relationship with the client or community member and ensure that they're kind of like getting the services that they need based on their experiences in certain cases. And so these are just like reflective questions as we go along with the presentation, right? Learning about trafficking definitions and statistics could potentially make clients or community members realize that they themselves have been trafficked or abused. So how can we help clients, community members, manage these triggers, and how can we assist them in dispelling false narratives, right? To be more empowering, we have to, again, empowerment-based approach, right? Going back to resiliency without undermining their experiences. So that's when we highlight their ability to adapt well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So all of us professionals, right, our organizations, we can all work together to strengthen resiliency through connections. And this could be further fostered when we have that gap in our organization. So for example, we don't provide this certain service to a client, then we make sure that we refer that client to another organization so that there's a continuity when it comes to the services that they're receiving. And again, movement toward goals and having broader perspectives, dispelling myths and misconceptions and narratives, all is equally important as the approaches listed in here. And to be more empowering of community members, these are just some of the best practices to foster a safe space. In terms of your role in inquiring about trafficking, especially if you are on a one-on-one setting with the individual, it's important that you seek to understand and provide support. You're not really there to ask in-depth questions unless that's literally your job to do that. And making sure that you refer individuals with potential indicators. So Luis talked about some of the warning signs and red flags, to appropriate personnel. Someone was actually trained on how to handle these cases. When inquiring through a trauma-informed approach, remember that the goal is not disclosure. You're not trying to get a lot of information from them because we're trying to minimize the need to retell the story because that could lead into re-traumatization. And then through consent, you offer education and affirm resiliency to the individual in the space with you. And when you're building rapport and safety, making sure that you support the individual in feeling physically comfortable, especially if you're in a physical space, making sure that you're aware of your verbal and nonverbal cues, and you're also monitoring the individual's verbal or nonverbal cues because these will be the drivers of your conversations with them. When we talk about, in the professional setting, I know a lot of you might probably have heard of this concept before, cultural competency, right? So this is really important in terms of relationship building with clients. So when you are culturally competent, that means you are aware of your own cultural beliefs and values and how these may be different from other cultures, right? So including being able to learn about and honor the different cultures of those you work with. So under cultural competency, there needs to be awareness, sensitivity, knowledge, and skills, and you're able to employ all of these skills so that you're able to provide better service to your clients or like a community member. And kind of like a twin of cultural competency is cultural humility. So this is when you recognize that your own culture and class membership impact the way in which you understand the experiences of others and how you advocate on their behalf. So having both cultural competency and humility, really important when it comes to service provision to community members. It's important for us, right, organizations, professionals, service providers, to engage in self-evaluation and reflection, that we hold systems and institutions accountable. And on a smaller scale, you can practice that by assessing your own membership in your own organization, right? So I was talking about being proactive earlier when it comes to approaches. So if you feel like your organization doesn't really have a system or a protocol in place to assist individuals who might be victims of exploitation or trafficking, that you voice that out so that you can take the first step in terms of making that protocol in your organization. And of course, recognizing the need to follow the lead of cultural and community leaders. I've talked about community needs assessment earlier and how oftentimes community members would know what would work best for them. And so it's important that we collaborate with kind of like a trusted liaison in the community, right? Especially when there's a lot of mistrust between, I don't know, like researchers, practitioners, and community members, really trying to have that um, first contact with a cultural and community leader might be helpful in kind of addressing that barrier. And so cultural competency, cultural humility, when these concepts are being discussed, it's also important to talk about implicit bias. And we all have implicit bias, right? So this refers to our attitudes or stereotypes toward a person, thing, or group that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. This is really cultivated over time through a lot of different factors. That could be your family origin, your ethnic racial background, your education, your occupation, socioeconomic status, your culture, your gender, and a lot of other things, right? So the goal of learning about implicit bias is not to be um, kind of like not to punish ourselves when it comes to things that we're kind of like overlooking, but having that awareness so that when we're in front of a client or a community member, we can better communicate with them, we can better provide services for them because now we have that awareness when it comes to stereotypes. So these are just some strategies to reduce implicit bias, right? So there are 6 of them. Stereotype replacement, kind of like 1, 2, 3, they're kind of like go all together. Stereotype replacement is you recognize stereotypes you hold and create alternatives. You do that to like counter stereotypic imaging, meaning you imagine the client from a stereotype group who does not fit the stereotype. Because it's true that a lot of cultures share kind of like the same personalities, certain characters, but it doesn't mean that they all hold that personalities and characters. So individuation is when you see an individual as that just one individual rather than being part of that stereotype or a certain group, right? The 4th strategy is perspective taking. We've all heard of this before, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, that you are making an effort for contact, meaning you're expanding your network or attending events where people of diverse identities may be present. Although I would caution against this because there could be confirmation bias too, right? So if you are in these networking events or any other events and you have this certain stereotype about an individual, and then you see a group in there and you're like, oh, see, they're behaving that way, so my belief is true. So I would caution against that. Again, having that awareness, that's oftentimes not really true. And then, of course, partnership building. You reframe the interaction with the client as one being collaborating equals. And this is true when it comes to client seeking services at an organization, like in front of a professional. So we want to be kind of like seeing ourselves as equals with them rather than being between like a high status person and a low status person. We try to avoid that as much as possible. Okay. It's also important to have an awareness about community fear and understanding community fear. And the whole goal of this slide is to stay away from the victim blaming approach, right? At times, at-risk groups like migrants might be fearful of potential consequences that could be arrest, detention, deportation if they seek help or make reports about exploitation and trafficking, right? So it kind of it doesn't make sense that they are already at a heightened risk to be exploited, to be trafficked, but at the same time they have this fear. And at the same time, it makes sense because of what we're seeing in today's society. Survivors and victims may also feel fearful to go to court and face their trafficker and any unforeseeable outcomes from a trial. Again, arrest, detention, deportation, and also the potential for re-traumatization. So feelings of distrust and fear pose barriers to collaboration with law enforcement to really advance anti-trafficking efforts. So we have to make sure when we take it back to the local and community level that we are collaborating with each other to ensure that we are taking the steps necessary to make reports, to ensure that individuals know their rights, um, and just like working with other organizations as well to fill in the gaps when it comes to service provision. This is like the second to the last slide. So when working with migrants, for community engagement, it's important to build relationships with migrant-serving organizations to access resources and coordinate services. That's what I mentioned previously. And foster connections within the migrant community to promote social support and resilience. A lot of the things that we're seeing right now is that organizations are really pulling back into the local and community level and really utilizing the strengths of community members in that scale. Addressing specific needs, seek resources and support based on the specific needs and immigration status of the client, such as job search assistance, housing access, mental health services, and access to healthcare. Again, it's not a one size fits all, right? So individuals might have certain challenges or certain services that they might need. So it's important to have that awareness as well. Immigration law awareness, so providing the basic understanding of immigration laws and policies to accurately inform clients about the rights, and you collaborate with immigration attorneys or legal service organizations when necessary, especially if your organization is not equipped to handle those cases. And then we have advocacy and social justice. So this is when we advocate for policies and practices within our organization that support migrant integration and really advancing human rights. Also making sure that we empower clients to advocate for themselves by providing information and support. So overall key messages with this webinar is that discussing trafficking can be triggering. So it's important that you just give yourself and your clients grace, right? So many people are dealing with their own trauma and may have different reactions. So it's important that you provide a safe space where it is safe to process that trauma, both for you and the client. Sex and labor trafficking and CSAM can happen to anyone, anywhere in the world. I think Luis made that very clear in the beginning of the webinar. Remember that you're also human. Going back to the community guidelines in the beginning of this webinar, being open-minded. As individuals, we know very limited information, but as a community, we know a lot. So be transparent and follow up with any other additional information needed, especially if you're telling your clients that you don't know the answer to a certain question that they might have. And then lastly, language matters. So you set the tone for the interaction in this space, and thinking back about like cultural competency, cultural humility, and the implicit bias and the strategies to reduce those, putting those in place and making sure they have the awareness, you will be in good shape in terms of providing services to your clients and your community members. So that's the end of our webinar. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you taking the time and attending our presentation. I know we're all busy, we're all going through a lot of things, but this has been fruitful in terms of seeing the participants in this webinar. I have one question in the Q&A box, and it says, the person is asking if you all are going to have access to the PowerPoint slides. So you're not going to have access to the PowerPoint slides, but as we've mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, this is currently being recorded. And then after that's done, we're going to post it on the website so you can review all the concepts that we've just discussed. Does anyone have any other questions? If you have questions, put that in the Q&A box, and then we'll address it as a group in this webinar. While potentially waiting for questions that might come up, Luis, do you want to talk about the post survey?
Sure, I will briefly talk about the post survey. Right now in the chat, I want to put a link where the post survey is going to be included. Some of you guys might realize that it's a very or similar questions from the pre-survey. It's just for us to get a better idea on how much information have you learned, what was new, what was different for you guys. So if you guys can all please fill it out. I put in the chat right now. It should be accessible to everyone. Aside from that, when I close out the Zoom webinar, I will also be sending a group email to everyone so everyone can have a copy of the post survey link. Yeah.
Thank you. I also have another question in the Q&A
Yes.
box. It says, what are some of the resources PACT offers to help parents navigate these topics? Thank you for that wonderful question. So I'm about to paste a link in the chat box. PACT offers educational services. So we focus on educating youth, parents, and professionals. So if you are interested in any of presentations that could tailor any of the populations that I've just mentioned, you have our contact information. As Luis said, he's going to reach out via follow-up email. So you're going to have his contact information as well. So you make sure you get in touch with us. But I'm about to paste a link from our website. And if you check that link out, it's going to give you, again, what I've just talked about, right? So parent workshops, youth workshops, professional workshops, but also at the bottom of that page, you're going to see resources about online safety, human trafficking, how can parents manage difficult conversations with their children, and then utilizing the community as a resource. There's also a couple of brochures in there about all of the topics combined, and then national hotlines and resources that you can access. Any other questions? Going once? I feel like I have to do like this slow countdown. Anyways, if you've come up with any other questions that you want to ask, again, you have our contact information. Shoot us an email and we'll do our best to answer your question. Oh, I'm seeing a couple in here. Yes, so the recording is going to be shared in our website. So if you go to the PACT website, um,
I
it
can
will be
send an
there.
email with like
Yeah,
once that link is available to everybody. So
yeah.
first email I'll send out is the post survey link, so whoever has a copy, and the link that Reynaldo just put in the chat. Once the video has been processed, filtered, and posted on our social media platforms and website, I'll also send that out for everyone so everyone can get a copy of that.
All right. So since I'm not seeing any other questions, again, send us an email if you have any other questions. If you want to partner with us with all of our educational services that we provide, again, for youth, for parents, for professionals, we are around. So make sure that you get in touch with us for those. Thanks, everyone. Have a good
I
day.
think to add on to that in terms of
Oh,
partnering,
yeah,
also
yeah.
for US partners as well, aside from like resources and brochures that you don't see on our website, we also have more individual one as well. So definitely collaborate with us, whether you're located in New York City or anywhere in the US. We can also collaborate with you guys virtually and share more of those individual resources that we have for specific communities. So we also have more information that you won't always see on our social media platforms or website as well. So
That's it.
definitely when I send the email, reach out to us and you can get more information like that. And it's in multiple languages too. Plus.
There you go. Great add-on. Thanks, Luis.
Mhm. Of course. Thank you everybody. I
Thanks.
think as
Bye.
we mentioned,